Happy birthday, Omori. Well, to the game Omori, not the character. Oh, and I'm actually a few days late. But anyways, Omori is turning 2 years old. There's a lot to talk about in this quirky, Earthbound-inspired RPG, and you better believe that I'm about to talk. But before anything else, I need to scare a few people off. Do not watch this video if you have not played Omori. Or if you have not watched somebody play it, I guess. I had no idea so many people watch entire playthroughs of video games on YouTube, but yeah, obviously that counts. Omori is a game best experienced blind, and the way I'm arranging this video, if you watch it with no idea of what Omori is, you'll probably have a hard time understanding what I'm talking about anyways, since I'm not going to be recapping the plot or anything. My goal for this video is to be quite different from other video essays, as what's the point of just repeating what others have already said, but it'll all be structured a bit like one of those iceberg videos. I'll start out at pretty surface level stuff, and each part of the video afterwards will tackle more and more obscure parts of the game. This video also will mostly focus on the Headspace portion of the game, as in most video essays I've watched and the one I made earlier, Headspace has largely been ignored, so I think I'm going to focus on that for the analysis this time. But before we begin, if you like this sort of video essay stuff, then be sure to subscribe and check out the other videos I've been posting. Some are video essays, but I also have a lot of videos covering the development of my own video games. So, let's begin. Each area of Headspace has a lot of symbolism and references to Faraway Town, and I want to analyze and theorize about all of these layers of symbolism. Some of these claims may be reaches, but it's my video and I'm going to say what I want. This is the Headspace analysis. Welcome to Whitespace. You've been living here for as long as you can remember. Whitespace is an endless looping void of white. This is where Omori primarily exists, and this is where the game of Omori starts. But what exactly is Whitespace in the first place? Well, here are the basics. Though this is all based off things in the game, I drew some conclusions that aren't explicitly stated in the game. So I guess that some of these conclusions are theories, but I think that I'm pretty close. The form of Whitespace that we see now was created shortly after or possibly even during Sunny's accidental killing of Mari. Yeah, I said there would be spoilers. Sunny created Whitespace in order to escape from stressful situations, and the trauma of the incident was enough to get him to completely cross over into it mentally. While the true photo album does not have labels, in the game, in the files you can see not only names for each photo, but also thoughts that seem to be from Sunny's point of view, even though the photos are taken from Basil's point of view, which is kinda confusing. In the 14th photo, which is titled Photo of Hopelessness, it states that Sunny begins to slip into a crevice in his mind, an empty white room, and right away, Omori begins to form. Omori is a representation of his mind's various attempts to distract him from the truth, and with that main method of distraction being, of course, Headspace. When Omori first creates Headspace for Sunny, it's very different, and this is way before the incident. Sunny does not take on the form of Omori originally, and instead of exploring with imaginary versions of his real friends, he explores with some of his older imaginary friends. Though there are others like the Faceless and Black Space too. The main ones seem to be Humphrey, the oldest, the Yellow Cat, the favorite, and Abby, the wisest. Humphrey originated from Sunny's memory of a book he was read as a child about a hungry whale. The cat is from the playground, and Abby just seems to be an imaginary friend he created. But after the incident, and after he begins locking himself into Headspace for long periods of time, Sunny becomes bored of his imaginary friends and begins to miss his old friends. In the game's lore, it is hinted that Abby commits some offense against Sunny, and that is why she is locked away in the abyss in the game. And I theorize that at this point in time is when Abby committed her offense against Sunny, the one that caused that banishment. Abby, being the wisest one in Headspace, and also likely being representative of the logical side of Sunny's mind, tells Sunny either to just go outside and be with his friends, whom he misses so much, or maybe even prompts him to reveal the truth behind Mari's death. And this is when Sunny makes his decision. Sunny sinks infinitely further into delusion and begins the cycle in which he is trapped in for the next 4 years. Sunny rejects Abby and chooses to create imaginary versions of his friends within Headspace, while also subjugating Humphrey and the Yellow Cats to less important positions in Headspace. Over time, Headspace begins to regularly go through cycles whenever Sunny accidentally rediscovers the truth, and so he takes precautions to prevent that. First, Sunny abandons his very identity, as that reminds him of what he's done, choosing to instead be absorbed by Omori whenever he enters the dream world. The other main changes that we know about are how Omori moves Mari to the picnic baskets instead of adventuring with the rest of the party, because seeing her get hurt reminded him of her death. And in the Omori route, Basil's moves to the basket himself to prevent him from accidentally rediscovering the truth. Omocat and her team created a really great experience with Omori. It really shows what a dedicated and skilled team can accomplish in the games industry. If you are interested in learning game development, then you might be interested in this video's sponsor, SNHU. SNHU has one of the largest accredited non-profit online degree offerings in the country, and I want to talk to you about their game development program. In this program, you'll learn how to make realistic, dynamic gameplay experiences with game AI, game physics, 2D and 3D graphics, and interface design. And you'll also learn computer programming languages like C++, C#, and Java. And you'll learn 3D modeling and texturing of game art software. You will learn how to research, develop, and contribute to advances and trends within the field of game programming. Courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience in the games industry. SNHU is radically affordable. Their online tuition rates are some of the lowest in the nation. You can go to snhu.edu/levin, also linked in my description, to see what the current average annual salary for a programmer is and to request free information about the program. Whenever you request information, a real person will hop on a call and discuss how the program can benefit you personally. Thank you so much to SNHU for sponsoring this video, and now back to the analysis. Neighbor's room is the first room connecting to Whitespace, and also where Sunny originally met the dream versions of his friends, as shown in this picture. The music that plays in this room is a rendition of Whitespace, but with very different and more childlike instruments. This could mean many things, but I think that it's just a subtle way to indicate that Headspace is just like Whitespace, an empty illusion. Neighbor's room is modeled after their treehouse in the real world, although I also think that it is slightly inspired by Sunny's memories of watching cartoons on Saturday with friends, as described in the Lost Library, as there's a TV and there was not one, and the treehouse is it's a treehouse. The TV also says that it shows a show with 4 boys walking on railroad tracks, which is probably a reference to the 1986 film Stand By Me, which could definitely be an influence for Omori. There's quite a bit of foreshadowing in this room as well, as there is a photo of someone familiar, a sweetheart plush, and an Abby tentacle. There's also a toaster and a cat-shaped hole in the ground, so I guess it all isn't super important. It's also pretty funny that the toaster is also in the real-world treehouse, despite it not being connected to power at all there. The vast forest serves as the main hub for all of Headspace, being directly connected to the playground, Neighbor's Room, Deeperwell, Otherworld, Firefly Forest, the Orange Oasis, and Pinwheel Forest. And as soon as you exit the stump from Neighbor's Room, the track Places in Between begins to play, which is easily one of my favorites in the entire game. It's ridiculously simple, but perfectly captures the dreamy and slightly ominous feeling of Headspace, especially since this is the first point in the game where you can run into a certain something by the docks. The vast forest seems to be based off of the forest that surrounds Faraway Town in the real world, and if I'm honest, the vast forest itself is pretty boring. It's pretty much just a default RPG forest, and the design of the area to the right and left are messy and uninteresting. But whatever, let's talk about the playground. The playground is home to tons of nicknamed representations of Sunny's real-life neighbors, as well as some of his stuffed animals. I don't know what Boss is based off of, as I can't find any real-world version of him, so I'm gonna guess he's probably a stuffed animal as well. There is also a train station that has a long line. I think this symbolizes that, Sunny doesn't like waiting in long lines. Deep. Also, in the old demo, if you waited at the train station for a few hours, you would get a joke ending where the text just says that you go on the train and find Basil, which is obviously the true canon ending for Omori. Basil's house and gardens are located to the south of the playground, and they are one of the most important areas in Headspace, as this is where the hole to black space is formed. Basil's house is in a shoe, and I have a little theory as to why. Back in the old demo, Basil's grandma is actually a part of Headspace, and the house was actually originally hers. And there's this old fairy tale called The Old Lady Who Lives in a Shoe. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that her house was just inspired by that, and it was left in the final game as Basil's house, as it was just a nice design. The Foggy Bridge and Pinwheel Forest are also located in the vast forest, and the Pinwheel Forest has fantastic music, but I don't have a lot to say about either. Beginning your search for Basil leads Omori and Co. up a comedically tall ladder into Otherworld. Luckily, Otherworld does not move, as the only way to reach it is by said ladder. And since I seem to be giving my personal opinion on each area, Otherworld is definitely my favorite. I love the purple space aesthetic of Omori, and Otherworld does this the most and the best. It is obvious that so much attention was given to this place, and it's so obviously stuffed with interesting stuff to do. From the space pirates, to Pluto, to the junkyard, to the planetarium. The couch scene is also one of my favorite parts of the entire game, and it looks great as well. Captain Spaceboy is an interesting character within Headspace, and I think the thing that is most interesting about him is how he has pretty similar parallels to real-world Hero. Kel says the Hero was depressed and constantly just laying in bed after Mari's death, which is exactly what Space ex-boyfriend is like. Although there is pretty much no canonical way that Sunny could have actually known about Hero State, so he probably didn't actually model Space ex-boyfriend after Hero. I just think it's interesting how similar they are. An interesting trend throughout Headspace is how different things seem to reflect Sunny's feelings towards different emotions and parts of life. I'll get to others in a bit, but because of this trend, I think another possible thing that Sweetheart and Space Boy's relationship could be showing is that Sunny doesn't really get the point of relationships at all. They just seem to randomly get married and they're divorced by the time you see him again. Spaceboy is endlessly depressed over an ultimately meaningless relationship with a jerk, which ultimately goes nowhere. This theory is definitely a stretch, and it is probably just a joke about how horrible Sweetheart is, but whatever. Firefly Forest. It's a forest with spiders. Just about every area has a small gimmick that adds to the fights, and in this area, Hero is just constantly having a mental breakdown. After accidentally running into the rare bear and having to load your last save and then running from the freaky spider cat things, you can enter a secret area on the right to meet with the very first secret Headspace lore NPC, Daddy Longlegs. There are a few of these Headspace lore NPCs, and have a lot to say about the history of Headspace. Daddy Longlegs gives very cryptic clues towards the truth, but also gives a basic history of Headspace. He states that Sunny created a door that led to different worlds, so he doesn't actually say that Sunny created Headspace, just that he accessed it. Eventually, Sunny found black space within Headspace, and so he created entities throughout Headspace, likely his different imaginary friends, and eventually he stopped directly going to Headspace and instead took on the name of Omori to avoid seeing black space again. Unlike Sunny, he knew he wasn't from Headspace and had the power to control Headspace, as well as the knowledge that it wasn't real. Omori was a part of Headspace, although he also kind of has the power to control it, but whatever. And so whenever Sunny became Omori, he lost this knowledge and was able to reach true ignorance. After you ride on a slightly dangerous minecart, you reach Sweetheart's Castle. Sweetheart's Castle is honestly one of my least favorite sections of the game, especially on replay. It really does not help that the real world plot was just starting to get really interesting at this point, so it's all that I was thinking about and all that I really cared about in the game at this point. But instead, I was forced to do obnoxious minigames about sorting sprout moles by bow color. Never mind the castle though. What about its owner? A certain obnoxious person. Sweetheart wasn't always like this, as she was once a poor child from the desert. But she found the keeper of the castle as something like being in Headspace, and another one of the lower NPCs, whom she begged to give her a castle and servants, and she ended up receiving this. But after this, she began her fruitless search for true love. She eventually gets engaged to Roko, but as her fan base of sprout moles grew, she eventually abandoned him and locked him in the walls of the castle. Sweetheart is pretty much connected to every single issue that Omori and his friends encounter in Headspace. She breaks up with Captain Spaceboy, making him an obstacle, and the sprout moles that are literally everywhere are her servants and fans, and following her into Humphrey for no reason nearly gets everyone killed like 20 times. Sweetheart's main purpose for existing in Headspace is really just to be a hateable villain to distract Sunny from the actual issues he should probably be dealing with. So Sweetheart is based on the combination of a show and the lady from the candy store who he hates, and makes sense that he made a villain out of two of his least favorite things. And Sweetheart pretty much seems to be a stand-in for Sunny's mind trying to distract itself, and only by finally being void of her can Sunny finally delve into black space and discover the truth. But in the depths of the castle, you can find the keeper, and he reveals the true nature of the castle. Quote, "It takes the shape of one's deepest desires," end quote. For Sweetheart, this is a castle with servants, but in the Hikikomori route, Sweetheart is employed elsewhere, so the keeper allows Omori to take ownership of the castle. So Omori turns it into the peaceful living room that you get glimpses of in other parts of the game, like Black Space and during the Truth segment. It really does just seem to be a peaceful room filled with pictures of him and his friends. But if you take control of the castle, then the keeper will warn you that you will change your mind soon enough. Quote, "All souls yearn for what they call home," end quote. Sunny's deepest desire is to return to what it was like during his peaceful memories of his childhood, and although this room is filled with memories, they are just pictures of a time now lost. And eventually Sunny will get bored of just reminiscing. However, in the Hikikomori route, it is already too late as Sunny is no more, and so Omori will live out the rest of his life in stasis. And there is also a very little known secret in the room just outside of where the keeper is, but I'll get to that later. Beneath the Firefly Forest and Sweetheart's Castle lies the Lost Library, a long-forgotten place that contains small remnants of the truth. And the library holds some of the most interesting bits in the game, as we get a more direct look at Sunny's mind than we are given in any other point in the game. The Lost Library contains some of Sunry's memories with direct narration from him. And some of these memories we later see in Memory Lane with the Sunny route. Through these short bits of text, several things outside of the events that are being talked about are hinted at. Many of these are somewhat important to the overarching story, like Sunny's lackadaisical personality, how he got his fear of drowning in spiders, his crush on Aubrey, his growing frustration with playing violin, and how Kel is goofy. But our short stay in the Lost Library isn't all we see of it, as in the Hikikomori route, we come back, and things have begun to change for the worse. Although you can see traces of something around the library at first, upon return it is absolutely crawling with them. Headspace is slowly dying, moving towards being completely filled by black space. And this library of memories at the edge of Sunny's subconsciousness is one of the first places to go. You can also come back to the library and face the phobias again if you collected the 3 sheets of piano music in Deeperwell. I think that these fights parallel well with the something fight and the true route. When Sunny faces his fears in the real world, he just barely gets by. But when Omori faces them, he can easily destroy them. Sunny is gone now, completely reliant on Omori to do everything. And so now, he is able to defeat his fears in Headspace without really facing the root of his issues. The North Lake is where you go when returning to Headspace for the second time, and it is a brief but mysterious section of the game, especially because it is one of the few sections where some sort of supernatural forces possibly come into play. The North Lake is covered in fog, which seems to represent how Sunny's mind is trying to obscure the truth about Mari's death. This area has many small islands with shadows that show some of Sunny's deepest memories. One of these islands has a lighthouse that, in the past, is mentioned by a Deeperwell NPC, was a location like Basil's house that contains hints to the truth. And this hint to the truth was probably related to the old family photo that is now blacked out. But anyways, one of the shadows you can encounter here, if your WTF value is at least 6, is Basil's grandma. As I mentioned earlier, his grandma used to have a role in Headspace, although this is now the only place you can find her in the dream world. In the Sunny route, you go through this area with Mari, and in the end, she tells him that he still has something that he has to overcome, before she becomes ghostly and flies through the window. The game leaves it up to interpretation if this ghost and the appearance of Mari whenever she plays the piano on the second day are just Sunny's imaginations or actually supernatural happenings, but I'll get into that more at the end. Although Otherworld is my favorite Headspace section, The Last Resort is a very close second. It's just very funny. All the children at the playground get tricked into signing contracts and then are forced into slave labor at the casino. Sounds like fun. And once again, Sunny's fears and opinions on life seem to seep into Headspace. Sunny doesn't really feel like growing up. I mean, he spends most of his time pretending to be a 12-year-old. With The Last Resort, he imagines all of his imaginary friends quit playing and instead they all go to work at unfulfilling jobs that they are dragged into. Aubrey becomes an accountant swamped by work. Hero becomes even more of a workaholic, and Kel doesn't really change in the slightest, but whatever. This also kind of foreshadows what was leading to Sunny's anxiety and eventually his mistake on the day of their recital, is watching Mari grow up and leave him behind to go to college scared Sunny, and so he took up violin to spend more time with her even though he didn't enjoy it and it stressed him out trying to match Mari's perfectionism. There are just a ton of great details in The Last Resort, and most of them are pretty funny. The controversial art piece is great, as are the portraits of the previous JohneAwesome. I also love how you can tell the place isn't doing well financially from the beginning with all the upside down earnings charts. The unbread twins also show up here after you beat them, and after they finally escape the eternal purgatory of baking bread, they instantly lost all of their dough at the casino. Haha. It's said that a great way to come up with a creative idea for a setting is just by combining 2 elements together. Spiders in the forest, junkyard and the moon, and of course, ocean and a highway. The underwater highway largely functions as a hub like the vast forest, but it is also a series of literal roadblocks in between The Last Resort and Deeperwell. In the last video, I voiced my distaste for Snaily, but I will issue a slight takeback now. Not because I like Snaily or training him in the second or third times, but rather because it turns out that you can just skip it. And I didn't realize that, so never mind, it's totally fine. There are a few fun little locations here. First off, Space Boyfriend's Diner was a pleasant surprise the first time I found it, and boy, I just love the 50s. The biker gang is also one of the best jokes in all of Omori. Other than that, my memories of the underwater highway are mostly just filled with Snaily training and exquisite extermination, so I'd rather move on. In my opinion, this is easily one of the coolest places in the entire game. Deeperwell is an almost completely linear path, which comes from the almost completely linear underwater highway to Humphrey, but it's a pretty cool path. First off, the flora that talk to the dreamer are really interesting and great foreshadowing. And also, I love the sound effects whenever you touch the teleporter things. Though it does get repetitive having to backtrack through this anytime you want to get to or from Humphrey, or whenever you want to grab the music notes here, and I have no idea why there isn't a Pluto station inside of Humphrey or just outside, even if you just unlocked it in the Hikikomori route or something. Plus, you can't sprint in Deeperwell, so it takes forever. But anyways, Deeperwell is home to the branch coral, which serves as the final optional lore NPC in Headspace, and it reveals quite a lot about the overarching lore of Omori, mostly Headspace though. Namely, it talks about the original 3 beings in Headspace: Humphrey, Abby, and the yellow cat. It also mentions how Basil is not in Headspace anymore and the stranger is him reaching over from black space, and just what exactly white space is, as well as the importance of the black bulb. I've already covered a lot of these, so I'm not going to explain them again. But what the black bulb represents Sunny's traumatic experiences being repressed, as the branch coral says. A hanging black bulb, the repression of an idea. And also there is what seems to be a biblical allusion with you eating the apple in the shape of Omori's head. I'm not entirely sure what this represents, but it is a pretty helpful stat boost. Once you reach Deeperwell, Headspace is running out of things to distract Sunny with, so it begins to dig deeper and deeper into his subconsciousness. But because of this, the very thoughts that he was trying to keep at bay begin to bubble up, spoken by plants for some reason. But Headspace still has one trick left, so it brings Sunny's oldest imaginary friend back in a desperate attempt to swallow him forever. Once a mainstay in Headspace, Humphrey is eventually forgotten by the Dreamer and is sent to the depths of Deeperwell. Forever unable to satiate his hunger, Humphrey loses all sense of morality. Oh yeah, and at some point some weird tentacled scientists take up residence within him. Humphrey populates the inside of himself with more copies of himself, endlessly messing around with himself, as he really doesn't have anything better to do. And that could very well be an allegory for Sunny's dilemma. Sunny locks himself away and endlessly plays within his own mind. Though the imaginary versions of his friends might seem real in Headspace, he really is just playing with copies of himself. He's frolicking around in a fabricated reality with no real meaning. I don't really know what the Slime Girls are supposed to be based on. I mean, I know they're the musician that made the music for it, and I also know that Sunny has a book about sea life in his room, but I kinda doubt that the book had any sea life that looked quite like these two. Both Orange Oasis and Snow Globe Mountain are optional areas, although Snow Globe Mountain can only be reached on the Hikikomori route. Orange Oasis seems to be based off the beach, as well as a book Sunny had about the food pyramid. Dino Dig is here, and it's a pretty fun minigame, but it has a dark meaning. At Orange Oasis, you encounter Mr. Outback, who is one of the optional Headspace lore NPCs, and he might just be the most interesting, as the information he gives you about Headspace is quite unlike any previous or following NPCs. He first off just confirms once again that Basil is not within Headspace, but he also mentions that Headspace is thousands of years old, and has been used by countless dreamers in the past. Headspace always looks different, but some people like Mr. Outback persist, as he mentions that he's around 33,000 years old. In Sunny's case, Headspace is very bright and cutesy and also very large thanks to his powerful imagination, and he also mentions that some form of keys have always existed in Headspace, which could also mean that there's some hidden truth in Headspace always, which could mean that Headspace is always connected to cases of disassociated amnesia like Sunny's if this whole supernatural angle of Headspace is true. Though this whole concept of 1,000-year-old alternate realities could very well be Sunny's imagination going wild again. If this was true, it would explain a few things, like how he doesn't directly control Headspace, how clear and massive his dreams are, and if it is true, it confirms that supernatural things may happen in the game, which opens the door for Ghost Mari being real, which I'll come back to later at the end of the video. The Unbred twins reside in Brevin, which is a completely optional dungeon, and also probably my favorite in the entire game. Not only is there some pretty great unique enemies here, but the humor is absolutely on point, but the real stars of Brevin are the Unbred twins themselves. The Unbred twins are based on the real-life twins Daphne and Browen, who work at their parents' bakery in Otherworld, and once again, their portrayal seems to echo Sunny's feelings towards growing up and working. Because he always sees them working at the bakery, which is a job that they will inherit whenever they grow up, which is a fate that he thinks is extremely depressing. He literally portrayed them in Headspace as just baking bread for all of eternity. They act extremely depressed, and they also get really anxious when they mess up at their job. And also, Biscuit doesn't talk for some reason. But whenever you free them from their job, it is sort of implied that Headspace will fall apart without them baking the bread that is the origin of all life in Headspace. And they also sort of seem without meaning afterwards. I mean, the only other thing they do after is go to the casino and lose all their dough. Haha, dough. And now, heading to the other extreme, it's Snow Globe Mountain time. Snow Globe Mountain is reached by putting a battery in one of those singing bass in an igloo in Otherworld. Snow Globe Mountain seems to be based off of snow globes, mixed with Sunny's hazy memories of winter, and you can observe these memories in the various snow globes laying around. And at the peak of this mountain, you can find Space ex-husband. Yeah, Spaceboy went from emo to straight up snowman. The battle itself is pretty interesting, as you have to use emotion-causing moves that correlate with his dialogue in order to lower his defense. I don't think this boss fight really adds much to my analysis of him earlier, though Space ex-husband's resistance to showing emotions seems to reflect Sunny's neutral exterior that he puts up most of the time. Well, at least Space ex-husband gets a pretty happy ending whenever you return, and Omori's reaction to the questline pretty much just sums up the entire event. The Abyss is the final resting place of Abby. You get there by going to the end of the highway and then navigating through the maze filled with somethings and anglerfish there. Fighting Abby is not difficult by any means, but she does look quite strange. It's hard to know what she used to look like for sure, but you can sort of get an idea of what she was originally supposed to look like from the old pictures of sprite sheets and the Omori Boy series of one-panel comics by Omocat, where there is a similar character who is not exactly Abby, but I think the fact that they both have tentacled arms and a question mark for a face is more than enough to connect them. And also, before I forget, I'd like to make a quick correction on my original video. In it, I said that in the original Omori Boy comic, Abby was trying to stab him, but she was actually holding himself back from doing it, which is probably an important difference. Some people theorize that preventing him from himself was the original act of rebellion against Sunny that got her thrown in the Abyss. And while I guess that's possible, I don't really consider any of these older Omori Boy comics anywhere near canon, so I don't think there's really any proof to this claim in the actual game. Ultimately, the Abyss is really not that complicated of a place, although there is a very easy way to access Black Space 2 if you keep walking to the right. In the Hikikomori route, you defeat Abby and either gain access to her gifts through Headspace or her for her eye. Either way, in the Hikikomori route, Omori pretty much takes complete control over Headspace, even the darker parts like the somethings. And the only real reason why you fight Abby is just to gain control over her once and for all, making sure that no part of Headspace could possibly interrupt the dreamer's eternal sleep. I was originally planning on 100%ing Omori, and I got every single achievement in my Hikikomori playthrough, but since then, I haven't gotten to sitting down and playing through all the Sunny Route achievements. I probably should, but I just don't really feel like it. My opinion on the game actually changed a decent amount during my second playthrough, which is a large reason why I decided to make this video, as I gained a newfound appreciation for Headspace. It might have taken me 50 hours to realize it, but Headspace is actually quite a bit of fun. Omori has a very unique combat system with emotions, follow-ups, and Pokemon-style skills, and with all the new boss fights and dungeons of the Hikikomori route, it really gains some depth, and boss fights like Perfect Heart are insanely well done. Thinking about it now, I think the real reason that I grew really annoyed with Headspace was just because the real-world plot was really interesting, and a lot of time in it, and the true route is spent during my least favorite two places in the entire game, which are Sweetheart's Castle and the first time you go in Humphrey. Although the second time you go in Humphrey is pretty fun, as it's just a lot of extra content. Headspace basically just distracted me from the plot because it was basically an entirely different game within the story. But in my opinion, while Omori's basic fights with enemies are maybe only slightly above the RPG average, as they are pretty repetitive once you figure out the best way to kill them, the boss fights are some of the best I've ever played. I played a bunch of Shin Megami Tensei 4 and Persona 5 after playing Omori, and while I feel like they have better overall battle systems, the boss fights just feel incredibly annoying and luck-based most of the time. It just feels like you have to pray that the boss doesn't use his most powerful attack over and over again. While Omori is a bit more scripted, which in my opinion works very well in his favor. The perfect example of this and my favorite boss is the last one, Perfect Heart. In order to beat Perfect Heart, you have to pull out all the stops. First off, you have to slow her down, as she attacks incredibly fast. So you use the Jax item with Kel, since he's generally the best choice for items because of his high speed. Then you can also use Omori's move Cripple to slow her down. The rest of the first phase is just a DPS battle where you utilize defense reducing moves alongside Red Hands, while Kel uses items to give Omori back juice and hero heals. But once you reach the second phase of the fight, you pretty much have to use a whole turkey or pizza item every turn just to survive her almost one-hit party-wiping move, which she uses every single turn. It's an incredibly interesting fight, and it really doesn't even utilize the emotion systems or follow-ups in the game, as they're pretty much obsolete by the end of the Hikikomori route. I don't know, I just think it's a really good final boss. Speaking of which, what about the new real-life sections of the Hikikomori route? Surely they're interesting. Well, I guess it's not surprising that the chore minigames are a chore to complete. It's very interesting how this affected my attitude towards Headspace. In my first playthrough, I was obsessed with trying to get back to the real world since that was where everything important was happening. But since I already knew what happened, and the real world is just chores and random mental breakdowns in the Hikikomori route, Headspace definitely feels more like a safe haven. And I think this is one of the most genius parts of the entire route, as it pretty much gives you an idea of what Sunny's day-to-day life was like for 4 years. And performing a Hikikomori route really puts you into his frame of mind, and knowing how bad it turns out definitely makes the Sunny route all the more compelling. I definitely recommend doing a Hikikomori playthrough for anybody who enjoyed the first, although 100%ing it is a different story as there's a lot of grinding. Although Omori has a lot of very good side content, as I really enjoyed Orange Oasis, Snow Globe Mountain, and Resurfaced Humphrey, a lot more than the original, there are some really annoying achievements, especially the Hikikomori route ones. While the bunny and squizzard extermination ones took literally hours of straight grinding, they weren't nearly as annoying in my opinion as the luck-based grinding ones. The Sweetheart Theater one didn't take too long, but honestly it just struck me as a strange decision that all the movies were randomized instead of just being in a set order. It would have made the area a lot more enjoyable and probably funnier, and I bet I would have watched all of the movies even if the achievement didn't exist, cause I wouldn't just be getting the same ones over and over again through the random luck. But infinitely worse than that was the recycling achievement. In fact, this is the one spot where I actually cheated, as it was the last achievement I had to get before I went to go do resurface Humphrey, and it was terrible. So I just used the online save editor to give myself 100 cans, and honestly I regret nothing. It's not like I even used the universal remote later anyways, so whatever. The final issue that I ran into with trying to 100% was the missable achievements. For a while, I thought I had failed Foes Filed, which is pretty much the complete Pokédex achievement. It's to get it, you have to start a fight with every single enemy and boss in the game, and you can only get it in the Hikikomori route. And I thought I had missed an optional mini-boss called King Carnivore. You can get around this boss by crushing it with an anvil, but by doing so, you never encounter it, so you never get the entry. I thought I distinctly remembered doing this before I knew it would ruin my run, so I thought that I would have to cheat because the thought of having to do another full Hikikomori run was terrifying. But by some saving grace, when I came back, he was still there, so I must have not crushed Mr. Carnivore after all or something. Finally, I just have a bit more praise to give the game, as I didn't grind for levels once during my 100% run, and I reached level 50 just before taking on all the final bosses. While I did have to grind for other things, mostly achievements, I got a ton of levels from murdering all the squizzards. But I never once went out of my way Pokemon style to do the equivalent of running around in tall grass outside the gym, so that was kind of awesome. If you just do most of the side content in Omori, then you won't ever really need to grind at all. And in my opinion, this is great RPG design. I'm not against grinding, but I'd much rather grind while doing side quests and stuff rather than just doing it purely to level up my party or get gold or something. But now we're going down into the depths of Black Space. Black Space is a bit like White Space, but black. There are lots of doors and lots of fun things to do behind those doors. Black Space is entirely linear, although some of the doors at the end you can skip if you don't really feel like doing them. And I'm not going to spend too much time on Black Space, as you can find a lot to analyze in it, but if you've beaten the game, you've likely experienced everything here. The thing I'd like to focus on more is Black Space 2, because I bet most people don't realize how absolutely massive and filled with secrets Black Space 2 is. But anyways, the first few areas of Black Space are very abstract. The first area is called the Pain area, and in it, you follow a stranger through a blurry landscape filled with distorted creatures. The background of this area contains many distorted images from the original Omori trailer. And the Disco area is next, and it's much of the same. Although it's probably one of my favorite looking areas in Black Space, the background just looks cool. The next area is the Town area, and this contains the developer graveyard, as well as a mysterious character named Medio. She has a striking resemblance to a certain obnoxious person, and was one of the beta characters for Omori. I'm gonna go over these beta characters more later, as they have a bit of history outside just what's in the game. Next up, in the backyard area, in the background you can actually see many portraits from in the game, including some portraits from the not yet revealed Truth album. The punishment area is probably the most memorable area in Black Space. It is where you are supposedly forced to kill Meow, or however you pronounce that cat's name. And one of the worst parts about it is that if you choose to kill the cat here, and you are in the Hikikomori route, you can return to White Space, but they will not be there. The watermelon area has always been my favorite to watch people react to. It is the first of many areas where Basil is killed in many brutal ways. And in this one, it is pretty shocking. In the beach area, you encounter the second beta character, Teiko, and she looks quite a bit like Abby. Once you get to the rain area though, Stranger, who up to this point has talked in cryptic riddles, begins to speak more like the real world Basil, begging Sunny to listen to him. And also here is Big Brain Mari. If you interact with her, Mari tells you to expand your mind over and over, and the brain grows larger and larger until it crushes her. This is likely a metaphor for how Sunny saw Mari's schoolwork and college slowly take over her life and force her to spend less time with her friends and Sunny. In the Faceless room, there are many faceless versions of your dream friends, but if you zoom out the map, then you can see that these elements spell out the phrase, "Kill me." The treehouse area is my favorite because it looks cool, but you can actually access this area one more time during the last day of the Hikikomori route. After Mr. JohneAwesome goes on vacation, you can enter the right elevator in his office, which will send you to the treehouse area. And this time, if you go to the treehouse, then you'll find the final beta character, Uni. In the raft area, you'll go on a fun little boat trip with Basil, and you can also access a distorted version of Black Space 2 if you keep on riding the raft. But if you go back after Basil and interact with the stump which he came out of, and you'll get some unique dialogue which hint at the ending of the game. Quote, "Do you want to be asleep or awake? There are only two options. Well, there is always another, but..." End quote. In the mirror area, if you smash all the mirrors, then the reflection of Sunny gradually gets more and more bloodied, similar to how you get more injured as you pick up all the pictures in the truth area. And once you smash them all, you get a fun jump scare. The bed area, which is referred to as time in the game files, Features clocks, beds, and tally marks like those a prisoner would make to keep time in a prison. This area seems to represent how Sunny fears the constant passage of time, which is forcing him to move away, and I think this is further backed up by how you can find some original dialogue from Sunny's mom, likely from the past, of her telling him, "Sunny, we're moving away." In Neighbor's area, Basil gets the crap beat out of him by the other 3 party members. But Hero blows a whistle here, and this is actually a remnant from the original 2018 demo of Omori, where Hero's tag ability was not his modern one where he charms others, but was actually where he would blow a whistle and call a helper to assist the party. This can also be seen in a one-off instance where he calls a gerbil to eat a block of cheese, and yeah, this is a really clunky ability, and I'm glad it was replaced with a much simpler charm tag ability. And finally, we arrive in the Church of Something, the end of Black Space. In the true route, Omori drags away Basil into Red Space and kills him before ascending to his throne of red hands. And in the Hikikomori route, Omori frees Dream Basil, and then Sunny gets trapped in a fight with Basil's Something, ultimately being saved by Omori and returning to Headspace. While Black Space 1 had a lot of smaller rooms, Black Space 2 is quite a bit different. It's an interconnected web of weird and mysterious dreams. You can enter from a multitude of areas throughout Headspace, most of them only accessible on the last day of the Hikikomori route, and you can usually only use each entrance once outside of the main ones, which you get to in the Black Space 2 hub, which you can get to by using the computer in White Space on one day left. Black Space 2 is most comparable to Yumi Nikki, which is a Japanese RPG Maker game that Omori was absolutely inspired by. In Yumi Nikki, you explore the confusing, open-ended dreams of the silent protagonist. Just like Yumi Nikki, Black Space 2 has a ton of symbolism, and also quite a bit of goofy stuff, so I'm going to be going over a lot of it. I'll probably miss some, and I'm betting that there still are some hidden things because I still get recommended videos of tiny little secrets that are inside the world of Omori to this day on YouTube, so it really does seem like not every single thing has been found. In my opinion, knowing all these secrets kind of puts a damper on Headspace, in a good way. Headspace begins to feel less like an escapist world and more like a slipping illusion. The Sunny tries to use to shield himself from the dark truth, but as we're about to see, the truth still finds a way in. There are 5 main hubs in Black Space 2. The 2 Black Forests, the docks, the weather vane area, and the cloud walkway. You can get to these hubs through a room just like the Black Space 1 room, with a bunch of doors, so let's go through them. Black Forest 1. This is possibly the biggest of the 5 areas, and it takes on the appearance of a black and white forest, similar to the ones depicted when picking up the hangman keys during the game. Exploring around this forest, at first it kinda seems like an empty maze, but if you go to the top, there is a raft that will lead you to a scene that resembles a scene already shown in one of the whole hangman key events, with a mysterious figure cutting down a tree. This man is named Dad in the files, and in the hangman event he says, "Stay away, you were not my son." Walking around a little more in the main maze, and you will find a waterfall that you can go through. On the other side of this waterfall, there is a weird clearing with a minecart which circles around endlessly, or squares around endlessly, I guess, squashing NPCs called Little Ones. The most interesting thing about this room is the pond at the bottom of it. Every time you leave and re-enter this room, it says something new, and it seems to cover the events that happened just after Sunny and Basil staged Mari's death. It mentions a man, Sunny's dad, chopping down a tree in the backyard. Then it mentions Sunny being restless and anxious, scratching his knuckles, flipping his bedsheets over, digging a pencil into his desk. And it also mentions Sunny hiding something shiny in a chest, which is the violin which he hides in the toy chest. You can also see Sunny sitting at the piano, playing a few notes and mumbling something to himself. And I think this is also depicted in this key scene, where Sunny looks into his reflection, and the name of the piano, Omori, and I think this is when Omori finally finishes developing. And also, what he gains his name from is probably the piano. The pond also describes Kel and Hero playing outside of Hector, and interestingly, it describes a boy sitting in a dark room. The boy lies and lies over and over again. This could be Basil or Sunny, although I think it was probably Sunny, who was lying probably to the authorities about what happened to Mari. It could also be Sunny lying to himself about what happened and beginning to develop that dissociative amnesia. You can also see a boy staring at a wall. Once again, could be Sunny or Basil, but you also see one burying something in the grass. I think that this something is the jump rope, and I think that this is Sunny burying it. The reason I think this is because in Headspace, under the ground in Orange Oasis, there is a jump rope buried. And finally, you see Sunny crying in the corner of his room, staring at his fingers and whimpering in pain. And then you see Sunny's dad shutting the car door and driving away. So I think that this dialogue goes away to support the theory that Sunny's parents knew that Sunny accidentally killed Mari. It helps explain how the authorities never found out, because it is somewhat dubious that Sunny would have been able to hide all the evidence by himself. It also helps explain why Sunny is basically abandoned by his parents in the future, with his father leaving and his mom leaving him in the house for who knows how long with seemingly no food other than an old steak. Man, that was a lot. And the rest of the forest is just as fun. Here's Ribcage Land. There's also a decrepit version of the faraway park here, with lots of big, weird Omori heads. Checking with these heads will let you go to a few scenes as Omori, such as Sunny's room where you are currently sleeping with a distorted version of Omori hanging above you. There's also an endless staircase of your dream friends walking backwards away from you forever. Back in the forest, you can go to this weird place where there is a door with an incredibly distorted version of what I think is Mari behind it. The door is locked, so you turn around and walk back, only to suddenly slow down, and now if you go back, the door is open. And if you try to go back to this room after exiting, then you are locked out because you are too scared to go back in. Creepy. Finally leaving the forest, the second hub area is the docks. This area is a series of dark walkways that stretch over shattered waves. There are a few different items around here which you can interact with, which will send you to different locations. Starting with a door behind some cobwebs will send you to the junkyard, although it's a bit corrupted now. And at the end of this corrupted junkyard, you can find some. Back in the docks, interacting with a pot will send you to the kitchen, but it is not in fact filled with 1970s New York mobsters, but instead Hero, where you can cook with him. After you give him some of the that you found, he'll cook up a big serving of for you to eat. If you go east and interact with a boat, then you are greeted by something that sounds like the Prowler sound from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. You are now lost at sea. This is a series of creepy, massive rooms. In the first one, you swim across an ocean of water, and then you go down a well on a little island, and at the bottom is a room with two beds, likely Sunny and Mari's beds, and pushing aside Mari's bed allows you to go further down. And finally, you end up in a black void of keys that spell out, "I'm sorry." Leaving this place and going on a secret path in the docks will lead you to a tree, and entering this tree, you will find the main attraction of the docks, the Red Maze. This is a big old maze with floating pieces of toast. If you touch a piece of toast, then it will turn into a hanging version of Mari. And if you wait for 30 seconds, then a bunch of these weird Hail Maris will begin following you around. And after waiting a little while longer, you'll keep hearing the phrase, "Look at what you've done." If you avoid the toast, there is a ladder in the center of the maze. Going down this ladder, you'll enter a room with another ladder. If you go down this ladder, then you'll enter a room with another ladder. Repeat this 19 times and you'll meet Daddy Longlegs, who will tell you to turn back, but obviously you don't listen to him. And after going down this ladder a grand total of 41 times, you'll end up in a black room. After a few seconds, Hail Mari's face will slide onto the screen. Yep, that's your prize for going all the way down here. I hope you're happy. In an old version of the game, you can actually stab yourself down here, which will glitch the game into letting you take Hail Mari with you everywhere else in the game. So that's fun. You can also look at some nice sprite sheets for Omori in the faces of Omori room and the Red Maze. How cozy. I really just kinda listed off this stuff and didn't have too much to say about it, as I feel like most of it is pretty surface level scares without too much to analyze. Still, it's really creepy and absolutely ridiculous how much content there is under the surface of this game. The last area of the docks is Mari is home, but I'm going to save this for last, as this is my favorite part of Black Space 2, and I think we should look around the other 3 areas first before coming back here for a grand finale. Black Forest 2 is smaller than the first Black Forest, but it loops around itself, so I guess it sort of is infinitely larger than the first one. Oh well. There are several boxes here which scream at you. Also, there are some interesting NPCs that roam around, like a UFO and my favorite, Sweat Heart, with her classic lines, "I'm perfect" and "oh ho ho." Kel is running around the area and you can bump into him, and he'll say, "Hi, Omori." There's a classroom out here, and if you interact with these desks, then you'll get some nice upbeat music. You can also sit down and a bunch of people will stare at you. But if you go behind the blackboard, you'll find a love letter and you'll get transported to a school filled with Aubreys which want to go on a date with Omori. Then all the clones fight to the death until there are only 2 left, and you get to pick which one wins. They're the exact same and it just kicks you out no matter what you pick. There is a floating mirror in the forest and you can play hide and seek with it. After you find it twice, it will crack and a shattered version of Omori will hop out. Then you play hide and seek with Shattered Omori, and if you find Shattered Omori, he'll break into a little pile of glass shards. I think that this whole playing with your mirror image thing is similar to Humphrey from earlier. It's just another representation of how Sunny is distracting himself by playing with imaginary versions of his friends which are really just extensions of himself. You can also hit this radio to turn on some sick tunes. And you can also go in a door that leads into a shrieking room. Once the room shrinks down, then you will meet this fellow, Long Snout. I think that the room shrinking in just represents Sunny being trapped and claustrophobic in his room, although I don't really understand what Long Snout is. I guess Omocat just got kinda bored of putting something and Mari everywhere. One theory I saw online was a Long Snout looks something like a Plague Doctor mask, and that the Plague Doctor is famous for being the last thing that people saw before they died during the bubonic plague, so I guess that could be something. Finally, there's the garden edge. There isn't much to do in this room, but it's interesting, as you can actually see right into Headspace from here. This is located right on the edge of Sweetheart's garden, and you can actually sometimes end up in this room from the other side if you interact with the bushes. I think it's interesting what implications this place brings, as it shows that Black Space 2 lurks right outside Sunny's consciousness, the point where you are literally inches away from it during the main game without realizing it. Oh yeah, and there are also a lot of Mari heads and a phone that says congratulations, you won, but they really are not that interesting, so let's move on. Up above the clouds, you can hear a cold breeze blow by. Floating pinwheels dot the landscape, spinning in silence, as you explore the dark, barren paths around you. This is the Cloud Walkway, and there are a total of 4 rooms here. Although one is a lot more important than the others. There are also some characters here which seem to be some of the old friends that Omori had in his oldest adventures, before he switched to imaginary versions of his real friends. These are the Faceless, who beg for Omori to spend time with them. But there is also another one which seems to have been an old specific party member of Omori's, Lumi. Lumi claims to have the ability to travel between toilets and asks Omori to tag you to use the ability. But you can't do that, and of course if you want to get to the toilet, then you have to kill him, because of course you have to. Going down the toilet, you enter Money Space. This is a funky little place where you can grab an infinite amount of $20 bills. Also, Kel is swimming around in a pool. After getting these 20 buckaroos, you can leave and head to the beach, which is a very inviting painting where a crab is tanning. Then the island catches on fire. There is a sprout mole in a box named Omori who is begging for money, and if you give him some yeast, then he will disappear. There is a different box which you can interact with, and it actually reveals some incredibly interesting dialogue from Sunny's mom. Quote, you hear mom crying softly. There, Sunny, we'll protect you. Everything will be okay, end quote. This not only repeats the phrase of everything will be okay once again, but also further backs up the theory that Sunny's parents knew that he caused Mari's death and protected him from the authorities. This sentence can absolutely be taken in different ways, as it is unfinished and open-ended. But I think it is pretty likely at this point that that is what happened. Despite what I said in my old video over Omori, at this point I pretty much believe the theory that Sunny's parents knew about it and helped protect him from the authorities, although this caused his parents to divorce and they don't really like being around him now anymore. And here, in the most important room, is the Herosaurus room. Here, you meet Herosaurus, who asks you, do you still accept me? I don't think this means anything deeper, I'm pretty sure it's just a developer inside joke. Also worth mentioning is that a bunch of these weird Black Space 2 creatures are actually referenced in the 2021 Winter Sale image that was put on the Omori socials. You can see Omori, Herosaurus, the phone, and Sprinting Kel here. I just wish the Sweat Horde was here too. Finally, the weather vane area. This is a dark blue area with a weather vane in the middle and 3 of your dream friends here, 1 in each corner. You can't interact with your friends as getting close will make the game glitch out and push Omori away from them. But if you do the interactions with them in the other Black Space 2 rooms, then it will change their appearances from the normal ones to weird ones, including the signature pointy chin hero. Navigating this area requires a bit of puzzling, as you can only do certain things if the weather vane is pointed in the right direction. You can change this direction by interacting with the weather vane. There are a few sub-areas here. The shallow sea just lets you walk right and left, but if you walk all the way to the right, then you can find a big ladder which leads up to a realistic red hand with a string hanging from it. There's also a small repeating room that looks like Sunny's house, and in it, you'll find a statue of Sunny's mom, who will stare at you and get weird if you go behind it. If you keep walking past the statue, you will eventually reach a dark room of a massive deformed creature. If you interact with the creature, it'll say, "Brother, I am so glad you're here." So yeah, it's probably Mari. We are nearing the end of this video, but first I need to go over the last few secrets that Omori has to offer. You might know some of these because a few are just things I didn't know where else to put, but the others are some of the most obscure and well-hidden secrets I've been able to find in the game. If there is anything that I missed in this video, then be sure to comment it down below as I want to know all of the secrets, but here goes nothing. There are a ton of ways to get into parts of Black Space 2, and I've mentioned a few of them, but I'm not going to go over most of them. The majority are also only reachable on the extra day of the Hikikomori route. Some of these are super complicated to reach as well. For instance, in normal Black Space, if you stare off the edge of this cliff, while something whispers "Sunny, I love you" for 143 seconds, then you are prompted to jump off the edge, and you can enter a distorted version of the docks from here. The WTF value is a game mechanic, kinda like the Undertale fun value, where a random number is chosen from 1 to 13, and the higher the number, the more weird stuff happens during the game. The majority of these changes are small, like a new NPC or a slight change to an interaction, but there are a few bigger ones. For instance, if your WTF value is at least 6, then Hell Mari will appear above your mom's bed on the first night after the door jump scare. There is also a stranger version of Basil's grandma if the value is at least 8, and if you have a WTF value of 13, the highest, then Humphrey proclaims his love of air conditioning, and the movers on the last day of the Hikikomori route become shadows like the strangers. Fun fact, the ESRB rating for Omori says strong language, just because of this one scene that you are very unlikely to actually encounter, which I think is hilarious. The console version of Omori contains some extra stuff. Most of it isn't super important, but you can now play through the boss rush again, but with Basil in your party, who is super overpowered. In this Basil rush, you battle your friends and also Mari, which goes about as well as you might expect. There is also a short boss fight in the Hikikomori route with Bossman Hero after Mr. JohneAwesome dips. This is just a quick note about the beta characters of Teiko, Uni, and Medio. They all show up in Blackspace, and they are likely remnants of old versions of Omori, as you can see their original appearances in old sprite sheets, this Kickstarter trailer, and this old gameplay trailer that Omocat made. Teiko's character was likely turned into Abby, but I don't know about the other two. It seems like these two characters were planned to be some of Omori's friends, but at the same time, Uni shows up in a sketch with something variants, and also in an enemy concept list as Empty Friend. So maybe they were planned to something a little bit more sinister than just another friend. In summer 2021, Mike309 found an old Omori build from August 2019. That means it was made around 1.5 years before the final release in December 2020. I have absolutely no idea how they managed to find this, but it wasn't actually a full version of the game, just the data files for RPG Maker. So this means that there were no old assets like old tile sets or sprites, but a group of dedicated fans were able to rebuild parts of the game, and ultimately all the differences they found were documented in a 600-page long Google Doc form. Yeah, some people are freakishly dedicated. But luckily, I didn't have to be that dedicated, as there was also a shorter document made with just the important stuff. And some of the stuff is very interesting, so here it is. First off, you actually find a door to Blackspace the very first time you return to Basil's house after the prologue, but you still needed to complete Hangman by collecting keys, originally called black letters in the game. There are also a lot more obvious hints to the later twists of the game, such as something having dialogue that very directly shows it to be Mari as early as the Arachnophobia fight. But the biggest changes are in Blackspace and the finales of the game. First off, Blackspace is completely different. None of the Blackspace rooms that are now in the game existed, and instead, Blackspace was originally what is now Blackspace 2, with all of the modern Blackspace 2 rooms being used here. And because it was made of these rooms, Blackspace was originally much more maze-like and had lots of branching paths, much like Yuminiki and Blackspace 2, although you could find the right paths by following the white egret orchards. And Blackspace and the Sunny route originally ended at a now unused location called Basil's Respite instead of the church. Here, Basil is killed a few times before Omori goes to Headspace, similarly to the final game. As for the endings, they weren't done yet. Instead, there was placeholder text that told about the various endings. First off, in the bad ending, where you don't go to confront Basil after learning the truth, you are instead woken by a gunshot. And I'll let you guess why. The rest of the true ending is mostly the same, where you go through some memories, although they used to be in mirrors instead of on memory lane, battling Omori, the recital, and then if Omori wins, you get the classic bad ending. But if the player wins, then you get a slightly different good ending than the one in the final game. Rather than being planned to be all open-ended like the final game, it says that there is an animation called The Truth, where it says, player's friends are relieved to see him, player tells them the truth, and after that, Basil sets up the group for a photo and the game ends with a Polaroid. I have mixed thoughts on this ending. It is a bit weird that after Sunny confesses to having accidentally killed his sister and lied about it for 3 years, Basil just decides it's picture time. Although I guess this could be implied to be much later, but also I do really prefer the closure that this ending has. There are also some other interesting little details from the development. For instance, there are several debug characters that were probably used for testing. There's Jas of Strength and Jas of Minth, which level you up. There's also a Basil with no flower crown that gives you all the black letters you need to go to Blackspace, which also has a typo. And there's Teleport Mari. It's funny because while all these characters are kinda scuffed, but even so as a game developer, if I was making something like this, I probably would have just had black boxes that you click on to do these things. And I think it's cool that even though nobody outside the development team was supposed to see these NPCs, they were still added and had dialogue. And it's also pretty neat that we get to see them now. The number 143 is found throughout the game. I mentioned earlier that you have to wait this amount of time in Blackspace to enter Blackspace 2 early, but it also appears in other areas. The something in the dark will one-shot you with 143 damage after waiting 10 turns. If you enter Mom's room during the sleepover with Hiro and Kel, the Mari will appear to you in the room, and the event is called Event 143 in the game files. There's a wolf that'll give you 143 clans in the last resort when you talk to him as Hiro. During the True Route Something fight, Something's first attack will always deal 143 damage. And finally, in Basil Rush on the console version, Mari's defense is 143. But this number even appears outside of the game, like in the custom URL for Omocat's YouTube channel. The Omocat team also matched donations to stop AAPI hate up to $14,300. The first 143 people at the Macron pop-up shop got a free gift. The listing for the SakuraCon booth cost $1,430,000 to buy, but you weren't actually supposed to buy it, it was just a placeholder. Omori's birthday is on the 143rd day of the year. The painting made for the first anniversary of Omori cost $143 to buy. The console pre-order promo says $143. The something keychain cost $14.30, and Omocat donated $14,300 to Games Done Quick when StarSmiley was playing Omori. That is quite a few instances of this number, so what does it mean? Well, it has since been confirmed, but 143 means I love you, a meaning which originated with pagers in the 1990s. So here is the last scene of Black Space 2, which I decided to save until now. Mari is home. Once again, you are in Sunny's house, but now it's dark, distorted, and big. There is no piano, and there is a big stranger in Sunny's room. This is one of the only places in the Hikikomori route where you can find the present versions of Kel, Aubrey, and Hiro. And talking to them, they will tell you that Mari is in the house, but ignoring them. You will find her in a crawl space where the piano should be. There is a door, and Mari says some unreadable stuff, and then you are prompted to open the door. Now at this point, if you're trying to avoid a jump scare, your first guess would probably be to ignore the door just like the first day. But if you do that, then she will open the door instead and chase you down the hallway. But if you open the door, then you can look out into the red room and she won't be there. And if you interact with the door again, you can go out into the red room. The red room looks like red space, and it has a bunch of stumps, knives, and flower crowns around the area. There's also a something zoo to the north, which is filled with lots of versions of somethings. But this red room is probably the most complicated area to get to in all of Omori. But there is one last secret that I have to show. Discovering this in the depths of the Omori Wiki was one of the biggest shocks for me because I'd never heard of it. It's so obscure and it's also such a morbid scene. This is the secret that I mentioned was right outside of the keeper of the castle's room. If you stand in front of this grate for a few seconds, then you'll be sent to a different room, and what room you are sent to depends on your route. If you are on the true route, then you'll be in a room called Heaven. Despite its name, this room is incredibly melancholy, and honestly irks me a little bit more than the next room does. It's probably mostly the haunting music, but I think this room actually does represent a positive thing for Sunny. In this room, you see a white room with something in it. And so it is likely that this is Sunny hoping that Mari is in a better heavenly place now. And since this is during the true route, I think he also hopes that he might one day be able to see her again. Although the fact that Mari has still shown us something makes it clear that he can still only think about the accident whenever he sees her, at least at this point in the story, even in a hypothetical heaven. But if you are on the Hikikomori route when you get here, then you will enter a room called Hell, and it is dark, red, and the only sound is quiet ambiance. Instead of seeing Mari, all that Omori comes across is Sunny, who walks away. And I think this represents for one final time that Sunny has isolated himself and let Omori completely swallow him. Sunny leaves the picture entirely, allowing him to just be Omori, and Omori will exist in isolation for the rest of his life. And now, to finish this all off, I'm gonna try to answer the question, does anything supernatural happen in Omori, or is it all just Sunny's imagination? Well, I'm gonna start by presenting the evidence for anything supernatural. First off, Hiro can hear Mari playing the piano on day 2. Second off, Basil and Sunny can see each other's somethings, and shared hallucinations are kinda strange. Third, for Aubrey's birthday, Omocat did make a comic that depicts Ghost Mari at Aubrey's birthday, which seems to support the supernatural argument. Also, Mr. Outback says that Headspace has been around since the beginning of time, which, if true, could mean that Headspace actually isn't just created by Sunny, but rather is a supernatural realm accessed and influenced by him and possibly other people. Side note, but I think a really cool idea for a sequel of Swords of Omori would be an entirely different story with different characters, where you go through somebody else's headspace, as I think going through a character's mind is a great setup for a story in my opinion. And the final piece of evidence is that there are little hints that the spirit of Mari is controlling Mari in Headspace. Mari gives little hints to the truth, and if she was just an imaginary version, then she shouldn't be able to know the truth without Omori sending her to black space and or wiping her memory. And then at the North Lake, she takes her true form as a ghost and properly begs Sunny to forgive himself before leaving. After this, the dream Mari seems to switch back to an imaginary version of herself that doesn't really seem to know what just happened. The appearance of Ghost Mari also signals a bit of a turning point in the story. Now, Headspace begins to get murkier, and you begin to see more bits of black space with the keys, Deeperwell, and Humphrey. I think this is also the first time that Ghost Mari has ever appeared in Headspace, and that is the reason why Sunny is so suddenly able to end the cycle that he's been trapped in for years. So what are the rebuttals for all this evidence? Well, first off, Sunny could have just been playing the piano when Hiro walked in and the game just hid that from us. It's hidden and modified bigger things in reality than that.
And also, Basil and Sunny might just be seeing the anxiety in each other, which sort of creates similar hallucinations, or maybe they're just crazy. The Aubrey birthday comic could definitely be considered non-canon, or more metaphorical than a literal ghost being at Aubrey's birthday. And the ghost Mari and Mr. Outback are still in Headspace, which could just mean that they are Sunny's imagination. So, what do I think is true? Well, I don't really know, but I've chosen to believe in the supernatural. It's just a bit more fun to do that, in my opinion. It's honestly pretty ridiculous how many hidden secrets there are in Omori. Even games like Undertale pale in comparison when it comes to the amount of hidden content. While I have explored some of this content myself, I found the vast majority of it online by searching through the Omori fandom wiki, and also through various YouTube playlists and videos. I like to shout out StarSmiley, who has discovered and cataloged much of Omori's content and history on his severely underrated YouTube channel. Renox has also compiled much of Omori's secrets and made lots of other Omori content. This video could not have existed without these people and projects, so thank you so much to them for existing. This video ended up almost entirely focusing on Sunny, which makes sense as Headspace is within his mind. I think it's really incredible how the most interesting and complex character in Omori only has 2 lines in the game, and one of those lines is pizza delivery. Also, I apologize for calling Mari Mary in my last video, that was awful. I'm gonna start making video essays more commonly over the next year. I love making them, and so my channel will probably become mostly focused on video essays and Project Seaborn devlogs. I started scripting this video right after I released my first Omori video, although I dropped it for several months, so I'm glad to get it out now. I hope you all enjoyed this dive into Omori's secrets, and I probably won't be making any videos about this game for at least a very long time. But I have several other topics that I want to cover next, so be sure to subscribe for those, as I think they'll probably appeal to a similar audience as these Omori videos. But thanks for watching. Bye.